What's going on? This is Mike with Licks That Kill, back again, talking about adding some flavor to your solos, taking your scales and doing a little more with them than what you had been doing previously. So it's not a matter of more scales, it's a matter of using the ones you got. Last time we talked about different ways to play the scale. The intention, of course, with all of that is to be able to see the neck as chords, or see the scale as chords, be able to visualize those shapes on the neck as we play and be able to incorporate those into our solos. When we talked about expanding the scale out to the sevens, we were playing 4 notes out of the scale, starting with the first, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. So if we took C, for example, so there, we've played C major 7. Part of the intention with that was that whenever you played just 3 notes, the C, and then went through the whole scale that way, you know, and so on. The intention is when you expand that to 4 notes, that you will start to notice, hey, wait a minute, there's 2 3-note triads here in this major 7, or in whatever the 7 chord was. So if you played through the scale in chords, basically, then you should have noticed that when you did the first chord, C, when we played C major 7, there was a C major chord in there and an E minor chord in there. So playing through the scale in that way and then relating it back, hey, wait a minute, E minor and C major have some things in common. C major 7 has an E minor chord in it. This is what gets us closer to adding some odd flavor to our scales, because if the tonality in the rhythm section is E minor, whether it's a riff or something like that, we might be able to play a C major 7 type phrase over top of it. We'll have the E minor that's in the C major 7 chord, as well as the C note, which is not in E minor, which gives us an odd note out, but not so odd that it sounds like we're honking on a bad note. So we're basically going to step into that now. So let me go ahead and play for you this guitar lick that I've worked up. So, all right, here we go. So anyways, the first lick we played, that is based on an E minor 9 chord. There's your 9 there. The rhythm section, the first time through, played an E minor chord. The second time around, when that lick comes up again, it's played against a C chord. Remember earlier we mentioned C major 7 has a C in it, and it has an E minor chord in it. So the E minor 9 phrase sat nicely against both, and in fact against the C gave us an even more cool tension than we got when we played it against the E minor. So it got us sounding a little out, so to speak, more so than if we just played it over E minor. But the 9 is cool, adds a lot of tension. In minor, the 9 note in the scale is very cool. The 9 is literally, if you're playing a particular chord, whatever its letter name is, 2 frets higher than the letter name is the 9. So anyways, the second chord is an F sharp diminished chord, and over top of that, let's talk about the lick first. So over top of that, I played an F sharp diminished flat 9. Imagine that. Here's the lick. There's your flat 9. The reason why I played the flat 9, by the way, is because the flat 9 is what they call diatonic. It's part of the scale that I'm basically playing in. So if I played a regular 9, we just said a 9 is 2 frets higher than the root name. If I had played the regular 9, it would have sounded out of place. So because it doesn't sit in the scale. Doesn't mean you don't try it, but to give you an idea, when you go through and play these patterns, if you're playing 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and you're playing it within the scale, you'll see the 9 sometimes is a flat 9 versus being 2 frets higher than the root itself. So first time the chord progression went through, I played an F sharp diminished with a 9 over top of an F sharp diminished chord. However, the second time through was a D chord. The D chord, a D7, has an F sharp diminished chord in it, just like the C and the E minor 7. Make sure you, or excuse me, this is the C and the E minor. Make sure you go through and play these chords and extend them out so that you can recognize the other arpeggios, the other chords that are built into them. This is what helps you get used to this idea and be able to use this idea effectively. If you've got to stop and think about it, it's not something you're going to be able to pull out when you improvise, and it may take you forever whenever you're trying to write it. So make sure you take the time to play through that scale over and over as if it were chords. You'll be surprised how much it writes that into the brain, the repetition. So, okay, so that was the second lick. Let's go on to the third lick. This one is a little more unusual. The first time the rhythm plays, it plays a G chord. The second time the rhythm plays through, there is an E minor chord. Well, what I'm actually playing is based on an E suspended chord. So against the G, it's more out. More of my notes are not in the chord. It gives me a really cool flavor. E suspended against the E minor, C obviously is going to sit a little better. So, okay, the very last phrase that I played, the chord progression was the same both times. The only time the chord progression stayed the same, it was A minor to B7. Here's what I played. The first 3 notes that I'm playing are A minor 9. And against the A minor, obviously, it should sit well. Again, brought the 9 in there, adds a nice flavor to it. Works very well in minor. You hear Satriani use a lot of 9s in his melodies. Very, very cool, very moody. So, the last bit is played over top of the B7 chord. Basically what I did, I bend up. I'm actually starting on the note B, but I'm bending away from it, which normally as guitar players we have a tendency not to do, at least not intentionally. But in this case, I'm bending up to a suspension. There's the root, and that's actually the 5th in the B chord. And then I resolve it all back. The whole thing ends with an E major, oddly enough. And I end on the note E. The note E is going to work just as well over E minor as it will over E major. It doesn't get more obvious than that. Okay, so at the end of the day, you want to remember, play through your scale, and it can be done with a minor scale. You know, you can go through and do that with any scale pattern that you know. Not necessarily pentatonic. You want to stick to more major minor type patterns. The pentatonic doesn't go straight through the major or minor scale. It actually has skips built into it, which is kind of what gives it its sound. So, but and keep working on trying to see what chords are in other chords, or what chords have notes in common with each other, because then you can start to employ arpeggios of one over top of another, an arpeggio of C over top of E minor, and so on. And this is going to get you more notes outside of, or what seems like those exotic sounds or that sort of thing, but really it's just major or minor. There are other scales, we will talk about that another time, but this is a great place to get started and expand on what you already know. Work with patterns that you know. Awesome. We'll catch up with you soon.